Uh, so I'm just seeing the number of students present here, and I'm also thinking of how the campus participated in conversations around gender a decade back when I was a student on the same campus. I vividly remember one evening, late evening in August, in 2013, when a very, very unfortunate brutal incident had taken place outside School of Languages, where a young undergraduate student had brutally attacked a classmate, a female classmate, and then shot himself. He did not survive, she did. And at that time, it was shocking for all of us. Shocking for all of us, because we've also, many of us who come from middle class backgrounds, conservative homes, JNU was a very, very liberating space. As a woman who's always been told, even by parents who may not conform so much to patriarchal norms, that I should still be backed by a certain hour at night. Right? Like how one should be, how does one keep oneself safe? Right? For the longest time, I remember that keeping myself safe was told to me by my parents, my family, and even my educational institutions that it was my responsibility. Right? I was a student in BU during my undergraduate years, when actually a horrific rape had happened in BU. And we had sessions by psychologists on how to prevent getting raped. Whether one should fight back or not fight back, how one should be careful about accepting drinks, how one should be on a date. I would just think, what a scary idea it is for me to go on a date with somebody who I like, but to go with this assumption that this guy can be a rapist. How do I live in such a psychotic way where I'm supposed to feel affection also? I want something to happen, which is love or whatever one may call it. And at the same time, keep telling myself that I have to be safe, right? And that was disturbing, Coming to JNU was different because first time I found myself in an institution that took responsibility for my safety. That told me that our structures, the way we are, will be built in a way that if I have to be safe, I don't have to think twice and lock myself in my hostel room and not think of going on a ring road on a nice windy night. That PSR was as accessible to me at 1 a.m. as to anybody else. Right? And that felt good, that one could be an equal participant in the world. Where the institution, the campus culture, the campus institutions were saying that to protect women's safety is ideally to protect, to make them safe to experience their freedom. My safety cannot come at the cost of my freedom, right? That what we are actually protecting is my safety, is my freedom, by making the spaces safe, right? So the onus of making the spaces safe was on the institution, right? And that is why, that August, when that brutal incident happened, and there was a huge union general body meeting that was called, right? And one of those meetings, which wasn't marked by political rivalries, we do witness a lot of political rhetorics and a lot of, one organization versus another organization in GPMs. But that was one UGPM attended by thousands and thousands of students, where the concern was that over the years, we've taken pride and felt good about being in an institution where the larger campus culture, campus institutions, right, take responsibility of ensuring our safety. So where did we fail as a country? And those were the kind of conversations that were possible initiated by students. Right? And those are the kind of institutions one would hope flourish, that one sees that replica of institution. So it felt great, finally to be in a campus where if at 2 a.m. while writing my dissertation, I feel like having a cup of chai, I don't have to wait for somebody to accompany me from that house. I can walk there by myself without having to hurry. Right? You feel like an equal participant in an educational space. And this equal participation is extremely important. I've done my own research on women students in university spaces, and if they feel, inclusion is not just about them being able to enter a physical space, right? Inclusion is as much about, do they feel equal participant in that space? Do they feel they're as, they have as many opportunities to participate in the way their discipline is shaping up? I'm talking to a lot of women. One got the idea that the way campus spaces were meant that they could never be equal participants because there were different curfew times for hostels. So while many male students would continue to sit with their friends, doing group projects, discussing, women students had to head back to their hostels. Then the library timings posed different kinds of challenges. Women who were doing, journalism felt that even during their internship, they were always given softer stories. Anytime there was some quote-unquote hard story, the organization would not be willing to send them, citing safety, right? But what was the concern of safety? The concern of safety was that the organization didn't want to take responsibility of something happening. Right? They would refuse to provide transport. They would, on their part, they did not want to have to do the hard work of ensuring that everybody actually has an equal chance. Right? It is in that context that an institution, that an institutional space like a gender justice cell, a cell that will look into complaints of sexual harassment and do gender sensitization, right, becomes so important. Gender sensitization also because one hopes that through that dialogue, you will have lesser cases of sexual harassment. Right? That people across genders, through dialogue, will come to see that actually when you make space free for one, ideally it should become free for all. Right? That our liberty, our ideas of freedom are not isolated ideas of freedom. When as a woman I feel free, perhaps if I happen to be in a heterosexual partnership with a man, the burden on him to provide for me, to keep me safe also goes on. He can be freer to explore his life choices, do what he would like to do, right? So our freedoms also liberate one another. They're not always, they don't have to be pitted against each other. Right? So these dialogues become so important in an institution, many of which were supposed to be initiated by bodies like the gender sensitization cell and anti-sexual harassment cell, GSCASH, that we had in JNU, whose active mandate was to start these dialogues. Right? Apart from, of course, looking at complaints of sexual harassment. And even, while we are talking about complaints of sexual harassment, an important part is to constantly, when we even think of what this body would look like, what the composition of this body would look like, it's important to think of how do we understand sexual harassment. Do we understand it as an act of lust and an act of desire, or are we able to see how power plays out? Right? जब कोई एक सेक्सुअल हैरेसमेंट का एक्ट होता है, जब कोई किसी को वायलेट करता है, तो क्या सिर्फ इतना भर है कि उसको एक डिजायर फील हुआ और उस डिजायर पे एक्ट करते हुए उसने किसी और को वायलेट किया? इज इट जस्ट अबाउट डिजायर और लस्ट, और डज इट हैव टू डू समथिंग विद पावर? And we do realize when we acknowledge that people across genders experience desire. right? And it's fine not to experience desire also, right? But there are many who experience desire, many who seek fulfillment of desire, but it's not everyone who's responding to this drive to fulfill one's desire by violating another person's consent. Right? You violate it when you know you can violate. It's an act of power. आपको पता है कि कोई फिजिकली आपको पुशबैक नहीं कर पाएगा. हम सबको डिजायर होता है ना. मुझे डिजायर है तो मैं क्या करती हूँ? I'll ask permission, I'll reach out, I'll hope that the person vis-a-vis whom I'm experiencing desire also feels the same way about me, and it's quite possible that he or she doesn't. It hurts, but then, I mean, they're not objects. They're human beings with feelings and choices and opinions of their own. And just as I have a right to say no, I also recognize another human's right to say no to me. So when is it that, I feel that I can override another person's will? It's only when I have power over there. I'm doing something for you and I will withdraw that if you say no to me. ये power ही हुआ ना, it's an exercise of power. मैं आपके लिए कुछ कर रही हूँ और आप अगर मुझे ना बोलते हैं तो मैं वो करना बंद कर दूँ. मेरे पास आपका ग्रेडिंग मेरे ऊपर डिपेंड करता है. आई हैव कंट्रोल ओवर इट. आप मुझे मना करेंगे वो उस पर इम्पैक्ट करेगा. आप जॉब के लिए जा रहे हैं, आप किसी चीज के लिए जा रहे हैं, आप मना करेंगे. आपके पास मना करना कम्स एट अ कॉस्ट, राइट? या आप मना करेंगे, आपको मना मेरे लिए काउंट नहीं करता है, क्योंकि अगर आप मना भी करेंगे और मैं आपके साथ कुछ करूंगा तो उसको रिपोर्ट करने से तो बदनामी आप ही की होगी. This is a larger understanding, right? That even if you violate a woman's no, the fact that you feel so confident, or anybody feels so confident that, see, she'll not report. If she reports, the questions will be asked of her. She will be asked, why was she with you? She will be asked, why did you agree to come to my home at night? People will question her character. That is the power that you are exercising, right? So if sexual harassment is an act of power, where we know that the other person's no can either be invisibilized, you can silence a person's no, or it can be coerced. Coerced माने मैं या तो आपके नो को खारिज ही कर देती हूँ और वो करती हूँ तो मैं आपके साथ करना चाहती हूँ, राइट? वो एक पावर का एक्ट है. या मैं आपके ना को फोर्स के थ्रू हाँ में बदलवाती हूँ. आपका कुछ इंसेंटिव रोक के, आपके ग्रेड रोक के, आपका प्रमोशन अपॉर्चुनिटी रोक के, आपको क्या बोलते हैं, आपको लाइफ थ्रेटन करके, कुछ और ब्लैकमेल करके, कुछ आपको फोटोज लेके उसको अपलोड करने का ब्लैकमेल करके, ये सब आप वायलेशन पावर के एक्ट है. तो जो इंस्टीट्यूशंस हम इमेजिन करते हैं कि सेक्सुअल हैरेसमेंट को एड्रेस करेंगे, उन इंस्टीट्यूशंस में इस पावर का अंडरस्टैंडिंग, उस इंस्टीट्यूशन के प्रोसेस में, उस इंस्टीट्यूशन के कॉम्पोजिशन में दिख पाना बहुत जरूरी है, राइट? इफ आई फील scared to say no to someone because that person has power over me, how will I take that complaint to an institution which is comprised totally of people who share power with that one person, who are part of that one person's clique, right? तो मेरे को पता है कि मैं कोई प्रोफेसर है जो मेरे से कोई सेक्सुअल फेवर मांग रहा है और मैं मना नहीं कर पा रही हूँ क्योंकि मेरे ग्रेड्स अफेक्ट होंगे या जो भी है. तो उसका कंप्लेंट मैं ऐसे फोरम में कैसे लेके जाऊंगी जहां पे मैं देखती हूँ कि वो प्रोफेसर डीन है और जो देखेगा वो लोग हैं जिनका खुद का प्रमोशन और रिपोर्ट उस इंसान के हाथ में है, राइट? तो बहुत जरूरी है कि जब हम इंस्टीट्यूशंस की बात करें, उनका कॉम्पोजिशन ऐसा हो, उनके प्रोसेसेस ऐसे हो, उनका जो भी उनका एक मैनिफेस्टो है, जो उनका वर्किंग डॉक्यूमेंट है, वो ऐसा हो कि अ पर्सन हुज नो has been overridden, has been denied, whose consent has been violated, can actually meaningfully hope for justice from that institution. Right? And which is why, the kind of institution that GSCASH was, about which Mollarika will share in much greater detail, was an institution whose composition and functioning so very well thought of and informed by principles of gender justice, which was, developed, written by women and, across the field scholars who were involved in movements of gender justice. And which is why it was made to be a democratically elected body rather than just a nominated body. Right? उसमें student representation हो, staff representation हो, faculty representation हो, representation nomination के through ना हो, पर elections के through हो, ये सारे इन सारे compositions का एक purpose था कि जो complainant आएगा उसका इस प्रोसेस पे ट्रस्ट कर पाए, वो ये सोच पाए कि यहाँ ये एक ऐसा इंस्टीट्यूशन है जो पावर से दबेगा नहीं, ये एक ऐसा इंस्टीट्यूशन है जो आसानी से किसी के पावर प्ले का हिस्सा नहीं बन जाएगा. राइट? And we see when these kind of institutions don't exist, what happens. One of the most recent examples which is there for us to witness has been the wrestlers' protest in India. Where women have come forward, not one, but several women, including a minor, saying that they are being harassed by no other than the president of that federation. Right? And what happens? Some committee is formed whose composition it does not take into account whether the complainants will have comfort, will they be able to have trust. This committee submits a report that is never made public. So there is no way to challenge it, there is no way to ask where did you get this from. Right? A due process, when we talk about a due process in institutions like GSCASH, it's a very rigorous process. I've been a part of a similar institution at my university at AUD, where even the process of investigating a complaint of sexual harassment has so many protocols listed, from confidentiality to who can be in that committee, whether anybody who knows the accused or can be the member of that composition, how many female members it must have, whether if the complainant is a student, that there should be a student representative there. How will the summons be served? How will testimonies be taken? How will cross-questioning happen? Will there be, will both the accused and the complainant have a chance to see what is being said about them and be able to give their own response? And also how to do it in a way that doesn't intimidate the complainant. Right? So the accused can read the complainant's testimony and give a response. But there are also processes which talk about not bringing them together in one space, lest the complainant feels intimidated, lest it triggers something in the complainant, right? So all of these methods and processes were really thought of as to how can we ensure that this can be a space that people can access and repose their trust in. And we see what happens when these these norms, these ideas are not followed. कुछ अपने आप से एक कमिटी बनता है, वो कुछ लोग से बात करता है, वो किसको क्रॉस एग्जामिन करता है, नहीं मालूम, क्या रिपोर्ट सबमिट करता है, किसी को नहीं मालूम. उस रिपोर्ट में हर कोई को क्लीन चिट मिल जाता है, कोई कुछ नहीं कर सकता है. एंड व्हाइल ऑल दिस इज हैपनिंग, this person who commands so much of power as the president of that federation, while he is temporarily removed of that post, he continues to remain in the government. In fact, the first committee that was formed to look into inquiries of the wrestler's complaint included another wrestler who's part of the same political organization to which this accused belongs. Right? What faith can the complainants have when they know that the committee is being constituted of people who are anyways close to the accused, who share the same organization with the accused. And while all this is happening, you have a president of Indian Olympic Association who's issuing statements that complaints like these tarnish the image of the country. Even if we talk about due process, and due process is important. Right? None of us here is talking about any kind of a vigilante justice, which is why, as women, we feel all the more need for such institutions to exist. Right? Because, ultimately the idea is of building a society that is built on principles of equality, social justice, where it isn't about, okay, today you have power, you oppress, tomorrow I'll have power, I'll do the same. That's not what the fight is about. Right? We are all here for cause of justice, but for justice there is a need for institutions to be a certain way. And then those institutions are not that way. Right? Look at what happens. We talk that women must come forward, they must participate. But how do I participate if I don't feel safe in a space? वो रेसलर क्या देश के लिए compete करेगी जब वो खुद जो लोग उसको ट्रेनिंग देने के लिए, उसको सपोर्ट देने के लिए जिन पदों पर बिठाया गया है, वही लोग हैरेस कर रहे हैं, उन्हीं लोगों के साथ वो सेफ नहीं फील करते. इसी यूनिवर्सिटी में आप सोचिए, फॉर women, for any gender minority, it is so difficult often, right, to fight your parents, especially, for all of you in JNU, I'm sure it's not easy for a woman to tell the parents that I'll not just go and study. I'll go and study in a campus which is away from home, in a campus that has hostels for men and women, in a campus that also has mixed hostels. I'm sure it's not an easy battle at home, right? Which places so much more responsibility on the institution to make sure that women who are fighting that battle at home, when they come here, their battle for their rights doesn't, get confined to being an individual battle. Somewhere, that collective needs to be there, right? So when the woman comes here and feels that actually, professors are making certain kind of remark, peer group is making certain kind of remark, you're getting unsolicited messages, people are commenting on the way you look, how you dress, your being a certain way is becoming quote unquote rational for people to behave with you in a certain way. Will you ever feel like an equal participant in that place? Right? For me, as a student in JNU, one of the things, I've been in DU, I've been in other institutions. And what made me feel so comfortable here was the fact that for once I felt I could be more than my body. I could be a thinking person and be recognized as a thinking person. This is not to say that I live in any denial of my body or to be a body is a shameful thing, right? But I hope I'm more than that and I wish to be more than that. But how do I be more than that when I'm in a space where my interactions with others always reduce me to that? Right? So it's important that I feel कि अगर मैं भी 1 बजे तक लाइब्रेरी तक जा पाऊँ, अगर हम ग्रुप प्रोजेक्ट में काम कर रहे हैं जिसमें लड़के भी हैं लड़कियां भी हैं, और अगर वो लोग देर रात तक लड़के बैठेंगे 1-2 बजे तक, तो मैं भी बैठ पाऊँ. That is the reason. It's very not strange actually. One can understand where it comes from. A lot of students pursuing PhD that I've talked to, one pattern that I've consistently seen is that more men are like, and even this is with university teachers, university faculty, more men are likely to call themselves research scholar, doctoral student, I am a university academic, I am a university faculty, and women in the same spaces are more likely to call themselves I am a student. Right? What is it that makes a male in that space feel he's a research scholar But a woman in that same space, the same class, continues to remain a student. Right? Because a lot of your learning is happening not just inside the classroom, outside the classroom. And that outside the classroom will happen for you when those spaces are equitable. Right? Where you feel that your voice matters. Where you're able to participate in the dhaba discussions, in late night meetings on projects, or whatever it is that you're discussing. That is where the academic language becomes yours. If I see why JNU remains a very emotive space for me. बहुत सारा लैंग्वेज जो हम सुनते थे क्लास में वो लैंग्वेज टीचर बोलते हैं जो अकेडमिक कोट एंड कोट जागृत है एपिस्टेमोलॉजी, ऑन्टोलॉजी, पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म, फेमिनिज्म, व्हाटएवर, राइट? आप उसको सुनते हो, समझने की कोशिश करते हैं, लेकिन वो आपकी वोकैबुलरी का पार्ट सिर्फ सुनने भर से नहीं बन जाता है। बहुत सारे शब्द मेरे खुद के वोकैबुलरी का पार्ट तब बने जब मैं अपने दोस्तों के साथ क्लास से बाहर निकल के बात कर पाती थी, क्योंकि फिर वो यूनिडायरेक्शनल स्पेस नहीं है। हालांकि जेएनयू के बहुत सारे क्लासरूम्स उस तरीके के एटलीस्ट यूनिडायरेक्शनल क्लासरूम्स नहीं होते हैं, पर जब आप अपने दोस्तों के साथ बात कर रहे हो, जब आप बाहर निकलते हो क्लास के बाहर और वो टॉपिक कंटिन्यू डिस्कशन के लिए कंटिन्यू होता रहता है, राइट? उसके बाद आप 1 घंटा बैठ के आपको क्या लगा, दैट इज व्हेन यू very organically and honestly internalize that vocabulary as your own. Right? As a dean student, I always felt that because I had to travel 2 hours one way from my college to home in public transport, right? And there used to be a railway crossing in between, so I had to be prepared for half an hour to 1 hour jams or closing of that railway part of it. I just felt I could go to the classroom as soon as the classes get over at 3. I have to rush back home, because if I don't rush back home at that time, if I rush back home at 3, I'll be able to reach by 5:30. But if I wait till 5, then the evening traffic hours and all, I'll not reach home before 9. And then you feel worried, you feel scared, you're quite young that time, you don't know how to negotiate the space. So a lot of times I felt I could not participate in discussions that were happening in college after the classes closed. And that was happening, of course, a lot because of my gender. Because my safety became important, more important than my intellectual participation. Right? Campuses like these allow that space. अब उस space को इसलिए हम vulnerable कर दें क्योंकि हमारा gender का समझ नहीं है. Right? And one understands, none of us was born a feminist. None of us was born with ideas of equality, social justice. We carried all the baggages of class, caste, patriarchy, race, language domination, and when we walked into the law gates for the first time. But it is a certain process that happens that makes you a certain way, but for that process to happen, the space has to be safe. अगर वो सेफ स्पेस नहीं होगा तो सब बच के निकलते रहेंगे, राइट? कोई किसी से बात नहीं कर पाएगा. A university space, wherever it is a cultural shock for everyone. For most Indians, it is a cultural shock. For some Indians, it's a cultural shock because after their privileged cocooned living in an air-conditioned home and an air-conditioned public transport, they finally come to see that there is a world outside that cocoon, right? And for another part, the cultural shock is that yes, it's possible, we are equal human beings, irrespective of whatever somebody else may have tried to convince us at another point of time, right? So that space is important for an equal intellectual act, right? And which is, once again I'm emphasizing, which makes an institutional mechanism for gender sensitization and for redressal of sexual harassment complaints so necessary, and it has to be a mechanism that is based on principles of gender justice. A lot of our policies, unfortunately, are not always made by people who understand those principles, which is the reason why in India we still do not think, we still don't fall it's not a crime yet. Right? It took a huge women's movement, and not just women's movement, it was a movement participated by everyone in December 2012 to push the government to constitute the Justice Verma committee, that committee which made some very significant recommendations to our lawmakers, and if not all, at least some important provisions got accommodated. The recent judgment that Madhurima just talked about regarding, not the courts not willing to establish marriage between homosexuals, right? More recently, we somehow, this is something that I still struggle to understand, that how does any dialogue or debate around abortion becomes pro-choice and pro-life? There's a life sirf ek ka. Right? Women is only exercising some choice, as if it's a choice which we are equating to choice of clothes. Right? We utilize women's right of their body to an extent, even when we just term it like that, as if that woman's life is not important. And as if that other life is independent of the woman's life and her life conditions at that point in time. So we've seen that our lawmakers, our policies, have not always been well informed by principles of gender justice. Even the Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Work Act 2013, while a way forward, right, was still a step back from the kind of institutions that universities like JU already have. Right, where a complainant could, it wasn't just a woman who could be a complainant. The complainant could actually be from any gender, any sexuality. The prevention of sexual harassment at workplace, जिसके ऊपर से ICC इंटरनल कंप्लेंट कमेटी बने हैं, वो सिर्फ वुमेन को ही कंप्लेनेंट रिकॉग्नाइज करता है. Right, so a lot of violence that can happen between, say, a homosexual couple, that is inflicted on trans persons, may still not get covered in these ICCs, which have been used to dismantle progressive institutions like GSCASH and JNU and the CPSH at AISA. These are, non-transparent, nominated bodies by those in power, and which is why you don't get complaints that often. Right? People are not, and once these institutions, the student community loses trust in, it will again begin to shape how we interact with one another. Right? I feel freer when I know there are institutions to take care. I know there is an institution which, when I go and complain, will not ask me why I was wearing what, why I was drunk, why I was with some guy. I don't want to go and report to an institution which will first do my character evaluation. Right? So, which is why the struggles for these institutions is so important. For our equal right to engage with education. When we are talking of rights to education, we are talking about rights to affordable quality higher education. Then institutions like these are central to ensure that these rights remain meaningful. Right? That people across genders, people coming from marginalized contexts, when they enter these spaces, they don't just enter these spaces and our whole facade of inclusion ends there. We do whatever it takes to ensure that the space remains equally for all, even in how it invites you to participate. Right? With this, I think it will be great if both of us share what we have to, and then we can get some more questions. One last thing that I would want to address is, like I mentioned the case of what the IOA president was saying, right? Which is why also, institutions, when they become functional, and why a GSCASH or a CPSH in AUD, in JNU, despite their shortcomings, which may have been, which is not to eulogize them, but which, because of the processes and because of a certain culture, complaint को देखेंगे कैसे? Right? When a complaint comes, what will we engage in a public debate over it? What does confidentiality clauses do? How will you treat the complainant? what assumptions you have to challenge in your own mind? How will those in positions of authority behave? All became part of that culture. Right? So these institutions were not some standalone institutions. These were institutions constantly dialoguing in a way that there is a greater sensitization. Which is why, I'm not saying that the progressive left on this campus has always had the best and, the best. It's not like there is no gender harassment that has happened there, or that they are the cleanest or the safest of spaces. But when one also sees how do they respond to certain complaints? Do they, the process is to hide the complaint or to talk, to try and address it, to question themselves, to engage in a process of reflection. That is what is important. It's not like suddenly sexual harassment is going to disappear somewhere. But presence of certain institutions and the dialogues that they are constantly located in also transforms us as people as to how we are when somebody comes to us with a complaint. Right? What kind of culture do we build around us which makes it easy and safe for people to confide in us? Right? So there is a larger, we are able to do something to the culture of the space in the way they are and they imagine themselves to be. I'll stop here and then later perhaps we can have a more conversational interaction. Thank you.